The morning sun cast long shadows across the military airfield as Captain Sarah Martinez adjusted her helmet and walked toward her F-16 Fighting Falcon. At 28, she had already earned her place among the elite fighter pilots, but respect didn't come easily in a world dominated by men who questioned every move she made. "Hey, Iron Widow!" called out Lieutenant Jake Thompson from across the tarmac, his voice dripping with mockery. "Try not to crash into anything today." His buddies erupted in laughter, their voices echoing off the concrete. Sarah kept walking, her jaw set in determination. She had heard worse. The call sign Iron Widow had been given to her after a training exercise where she had been particularly ruthless in taking down her targets. The other pilots thought it was funny, a play on the idea that she was cold and emotionless, like a spider that devours her mate. They didn't know the real story behind the name, and Sarah wasn't about to enlighten them. Colonel Marcus Webb stood near the briefing room, observing the interaction with a frown. He had been Sarah's commanding officer for 6 months now, and while he respected her flying abilities, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her story than what appeared in her official file. Her records were impressive, but strangely incomplete, with several classified sections that even he couldn't access. "Martinez," he called out as she passed. "A word." Sarah stopped and turned, saluting smartly. "Yes, sir." "Walk with me." They moved away from the group of laughing pilots toward a quieter section of the base. "I've been reviewing the mission parameters for tomorrow's operation. You're leading Alpha Squadron into hostile territory. Are you ready for this?" Sarah's eyes hardened. "More than ready, sir. Alpha Squadron won't let you down." Webb studied her face carefully. There was something in her expression, a cold determination that went beyond normal military training. "The intelligence reports suggest we might encounter advanced enemy aircraft. This isn't going to be like the training exercises." "I understand, sir." Sarah's voice was steady, professional. "My squadron knows what's at stake." As they walked, Webb noticed the way other personnel looked at Sarah. Some with admiration, others with barely concealed resentment. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had seen real combat. Yet her official record showed only training missions and routine patrols. "Tell me about your time before joining this squadron," Webb said, trying to sound casual. Sarah's step faltered for just a moment. "Standard training, sir. Flight school, advanced tactical training, the usual progression." "And the classified sections in your file?" This time, Sarah stopped completely. She turned to face her commanding officer, and for a brief moment, Webb saw something flash in her eyes. Pain, maybe, or anger. "Some things are classified for good reasons, Colonel." Back at the aircraft, Lieutenant Thompson was still entertaining his friends with jokes about the Ice Queen and her supposed inability to handle real combat. "Mark my words," he said, polishing his helmet. "When the real shooting starts, she'll crack." "Women always do." Senior Master Sergeant Rodriguez, a veteran with 20 years of service, overheard the conversation. "You might want to be careful what you say about Captain Martinez, Lieutenant." "Why? What's she going to do, file a complaint?" Thompson laughed. Rodriguez shook his head. "It's not what she'll do, son. It's what she's already done that should make you think twice." "What do you mean?" The older sergeant looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "I served in Afghanistan for 3 tours. Heard stories about a pilot who single-handedly took out an entire enemy squadron that had been terrorizing coalition forces for months. They called her the Angel of Death. Never could get confirmation. But the timing matches up with when Martinez was supposedly in advanced training." Thompson's smirk faded slightly. "You're making that up." "Maybe I am," Rodriguez said, walking away. "But I'd be real careful about underestimating that woman if I were you." As the day wore on, Sarah completed her pre-flight checks with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. Each switch, each gauge, each system was verified twice. Her ground crew watched in silent admiration as she worked. They had seen enough pilots to recognize the difference between someone who flew for glory and someone who flew because it was in their blood. Technical Sergeant Williams, her crew chief, approached with a clipboard. "All systems green, Captain. She's ready to fly." Sarah nodded, running her hand along the aircraft's fuselage. "Thanks, Chief. Take care of her while I'm gone." "Always do, ma'am." Williams hesitated for a moment. "Captain, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "The other pilots, they don't know, do they? About what really happened overseas?" Sarah's expression didn't change, but Williams caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "What happened overseas stays overseas, Chief. That's how it has to be." "Yes, ma'am. But for what it's worth, it's an honor working with you." As Sarah climbed into her cockpit, she couldn't help but think about the mission ahead. Tomorrow would test everything she had learned, everything she had become. The other pilots saw her as an outsider, someone who didn't belong in their elite world. They had no idea that she had already proven herself in ways they couldn't imagine. The radio crackled to life as ground control began the evening briefing. "All pilots report to the ready room for mission briefing in 30 minutes. Sarah finished her checks and climbed down from the aircraft. As she walked toward the briefing room, she passed Thompson and his group again. This time their conversation stopped when they saw her approaching. "Iron Widow," Thompson said, but his tone was different now, less mocking, more uncertain. Sarah paused and looked directly at him. "That's Captain Martinez to you, Lieutenant." The authority in her voice made Thompson step back involuntarily. Yes, ma'am." As Sarah continued toward the briefing room, she could feel their eyes on her back. Let them wonder, she thought. Tomorrow they would all understand why she had earned her call sign, and it had nothing to do with being cold or emotionless. The briefing room was filled with the usual pre-mission tension. Maps covered the walls, showing enemy positions and flight paths. Colonel Webb stood at the front, waiting for all the pilots to settle in. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "tomorrow's mission is codenamed Operation Steel Rain. We have confirmed intelligence of enemy aircraft movement in Sector 7. Your job is to establish air superiority and protect our ground forces." As Webb outlined the mission parameters, Sarah studied the maps intently. The terrain looked familiar, too familiar. It reminded her of another place, another time, when she had flown into similar territory with very different orders. "Captain Martinez will lead Alpha Squadron," Webb continued. "Lieutenant Thompson. You'll take Beta Squadron and provide cover for the transport aircraft." Thompson glanced at Sarah, his earlier confidence replaced by uncertainty. The way she studied those maps, the intensity in her eyes, it was starting to make sense why even the senior officers treated her with unusual respect. "Any questions?" Webb asked. The room was silent. Sarah raised her hand. "Sir, what's our rules of engagement if we encounter superior numbers?" "Use your best judgment, Captain. You have tactical command." Sarah nodded, and Webb caught that look in her eyes again. It was the look of someone who had made life-and-death decisions before, someone who knew exactly what use your best judgment meant in combat. As the briefing ended and pilots began filing out, Sarah remained seated, still studying the maps. The mission tomorrow would either vindicate her presence in the squadron or confirm the doubts some still held about her abilities. What none of them knew was that Sarah had flown similar missions before, in places where failure meant not just career disappointment, but death, where she had earned her call sign not through training exercises, but through actions that were still classified at the highest levels. Tomorrow, Lieutenant Thompson and the others would learn why some call signs are earned in blood, and why the best pilots are often the ones who have already faced their worst fears and survived to fly again. The alarm pierced the pre-dawn silence at 0400 hours, jolting everyone from their restless sleep. Sarah was already awake, sitting on the edge of her bunk. staring at a worn photograph she kept hidden in her flight suit pocket. The faces in the picture seemed to give her strength as she prepared for what lay ahead. "All pilots to the ready room! This is not a drill!" The announcement echoed through the barracks as emergency lights bathed everything in red. Colonel Webb was already in the briefing room when the pilots arrived, his face grim. "Intelligence has confirmed large-scale enemy air movement. They're heading directly toward our forward operating base with ground support. We have approximately 2 hours before they reach our positions." Lieutenant Thompson shifted nervously in his seat. This was his first real combat mission, and the gravity of the situation was beginning to sink in. He glanced at Sarah, who sat perfectly still, her attention focused entirely on Webb's words. "The enemy force is larger than anticipated," Webb continued. "We're looking at approximately 20 enemy aircraft, including advanced fighters. Our mission is to intercept and neutralize the threat before they can reach our ground forces." A murmur ran through the room. 20 enemy aircraft against their squadron of 12 was not favorable odds. Several pilots exchanged worried glances. "Captain Martinez," Webb said, "you'll lead the primary strike force. I want you to take Alpha Squadron and hit them head-on. Lieutenant Thompson, Beta Squadron will provide flanking support." Sarah stood and walked to the tactical display. She studied the projected flight paths and enemy positions with the intensity of someone reading a life-or-death puzzle. "Sir, request permission to modify the attack formation." "Go ahead, Captain." Sarah picked up a marker and began drawing on the tactical board. "Instead of a frontal assault, I recommend we use the canyon system here to approach from below their radar coverage. We can split into 3 groups, hit them from multiple angles simultaneously." Webb studied her proposed formation. It was aggressive, risky, and required precise timing. "That's a complex maneuver, Captain. One mistake, and we could lose aircraft to friendly fire." "Sir, frontal assault against superior numbers is suicide. This gives us the element of surprise and better positioning for the engagement." Thompson stood up. "With respect, Captain, that maneuver is extremely dangerous. Maybe we should stick to standard tactics." Sarah turned to look at him, and something in her expression made him take a step back. "Lieutenant, in combat, standard tactics against superior numbers get people killed. Trust me on this." The authority in her voice was absolute. Webb realized that whatever was in Sarah's classified file, it had given her experience that none of the other pilots possessed. "We'll go with Captain Martinez's plan," Webb decided. "Pilots, you have 30 minutes to prep your aircraft. Good luck." As the pilots rushed to their aircraft, Technical Sergeant Williams approached Sarah at her F-16. "Captain, I've armed her with full air-to-air loadout, 6 AIM-120 AMRAAMs and 2 AIM-9 Sidewinders." Sarah nodded, running through her mental checklist. "Thanks, Chief. Keep the emergency crews ready. This is going to get messy." "Ma'am," Williams hesitated. "The other pilots are nervous. Word is spreading that this is bigger than anyone expected." Sarah climbed into her cockpit and began her startup sequence. "Fear is normal, Chief. What matters is what you do with it." Across the flight line, Thompson was struggling with his own pre-flight checks. His hands were shaking slightly, and he kept making small mistakes. His crew chief, Sergeant Davis, noticed his nervousness. "First combat mission is always rough, sir," Davis said encouragingly. "Just stick close to Captain Martinez. She'll get you through this." "How can you be so sure?" Thompson asked. Davis lowered his voice. "Because I was stationed in Kandahar when she was there. I saw what she could do." Before Thompson could ask what he meant, the radio crackled to life. "All aircraft, this is Iron Widow. Pre-flight checks complete. Alpha Squadron, report status." One by one, the pilots reported ready. Sarah's calm, professional voice seemed to steady everyone's nerves. "Beta Squadron, report status," Thompson called out, trying to match Sarah's composure. As the aircraft taxied to the runway, Colonel Webb watched from the control tower. He had made a career out of reading people, and something about Sarah's demeanor troubled him. She was too calm, too prepared for what should be a shocking escalation of hostilities. Tower, this is Iron Widow requesting permission to take off. Iron Widow, you are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed. The 12 aircraft lifted off in perfect formation, climbing into the gray dawn sky. As they gained altitude, Sarah's voice came over the radio again. All aircraft maintain radio silence until we reach the initial point. Follow my lead and stick to the flight plan. We're going to hit them fast and hard. 30 minutes later, they reached the canyon system Sarah had identified on the tactical display. The landscape below was rugged and unforgiving, with steep walls that would hide their approach from enemy radar. Alpha Squadron, begin descent to attack altitude, Sarah commanded. Beta Squadron, take position for flanking maneuver. Thompson's heart was racing as he led his squadron into position. The canyon walls rose on either side of his aircraft, and he had to fight the urge to pull up and get more clearance. Contact! Enemy aircraft at 2 o'clock, 20 miles and closing, came the call from the early warning aircraft. Sarah's voice cut through the radio chatter with ice-cold precision. All aircraft, weapons hot. Remember, hit fast, hit hard, and watch your wingman. The enemy formation appeared on their radar screens like a swarm of angry hornets. 20 contacts, just as intelligence had predicted, flying in a loose formation that suggested they weren't expecting opposition. Alpha Squadron, execute attack run, Sarah called out. What happened next would be talked about for years afterward. Sarah's aircraft shot out of the canyon like a guided missile, her first 2 shots taking down enemy fighters before they even knew they were under attack. Her maneuvers were precise, almost supernatural in their accuracy. Thompson, watching from his flanking position, couldn't believe what he was seeing. Sarah was flying like she had done this 1,000 times before, anticipating enemy movements and responding with deadly efficiency. Beta Squadron. Engage targets of opportunity, Sarah called out as she rolled inverted to avoid incoming missiles. The sky erupted into a deadly ballet of aircraft, missiles, and tracer fire. Thompson found himself face-to-face with an enemy fighter and barely managed to get a missile lock before the enemy pilot could fire. Fox 3, he called out, launching his missile. The enemy aircraft exploded in a ball of fire, and Thompson felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with relief. But when he looked around for Sarah, she was nowhere to be seen. Iron Widow, this is Viper 2, where are you? He called out. Viper 2, I'm engaging multiple contacts at low altitude. Continue your attack run. Thompson looked down and saw something that made his blood run cold. Sarah was flying at treetop level, pursued by 4 enemy fighters in a deadly game of cat and mouse through the canyon system. As he watched, she executed a maneuver that should have been impossible at that altitude and speed, pulling her aircraft into a vertical climb that brought her behind one of her pursuers. Her missile found its target instantly. That's impossible, Thompson muttered to himself. But Sarah wasn't finished. She rolled her aircraft into a dive that took her back into the canyon, the remaining enemy fighters following. Thompson could hear her breathing over the radio, steady and controlled despite the G-forces she was pulling. Alpha 3, this is Iron Widow. I need you to take the high position and cut off their escape route. Roger, Iron Widow, moving to intercept. What Thompson witnessed next would haunt his dreams for months. Sarah emerged from the canyon behind the remaining enemy fighters, having somehow maneuvered into the perfect attack position. Her missiles found their targets with surgical precision, and within seconds, the threat was eliminated. All aircraft, threat neutralized. Form up for return to base. Sarah's voice came over the radio, as calm as if she had just completed a training exercise. The flight back to base was conducted in stunned silence. Thompson kept replaying what he had witnessed, trying to understand how anyone could fly with that level of skill and precision under combat conditions. As they touched down, ground crews rushed to inspect the aircraft. Sarah's F-16 showed signs of extreme stress from the maneuvers she had performed, but it had held together. Colonel Webb was waiting on the tarmac as Sarah climbed out of her cockpit. "Captain, I need to see you in my office immediately." Thompson watched as Sarah walked away with Webb, her helmet tucked under her arm, looking like she had just returned from a routine training flight. The other pilots gathered around him, all talking at once about what they had witnessed. "Did you see those maneuvers? How did she know exactly where to position herself? I've never seen flying like that." Technical Sergeant Williams approached the group, shaking his head. "Gentlemen, you just witnessed a master at work." "Chief," Thompson said, "what really happened when she was overseas?" Williams looked around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "What happened today?" "That was just a warm-up compared to what she did in Afghanistan." Colonel Webb's office felt smaller than usual as Sarah sat across from his desk, still wearing her flight suit. The adrenaline from the mission was beginning to fade, replaced by a familiar emptiness that always followed combat. 20 enemy aircraft, Webb said, studying the mission report. 0 losses on our side. 17 confirmed kills, with 12 of those credited to you personally. He looked up from the papers. "Captain, I've been flying for 22 years, and I've never seen anything like what happened out there today." Sarah remained silent, her hands folded in her lap. She had learned long ago that sometimes the best response was no response at all. Webb opened a thick folder marked with multiple classification stamps. "I made some calls after the mission, pulled in favors I didn't even know I had." He turned the folder around so Sarah could see it. "Care to explain why your real service record was buried under enough red tape to classify a nuclear submarine?" Sarah looked at the documents but didn't touch them. She could see her real name, her real assignments, and most importantly, the mission reports from her time in Afghanistan that had earned her the call sign Iron Widow. "Some things are better left buried, Colonel." "Not anymore." Webb pulled out a photograph and placed it on the desk. It showed Sarah standing next to an F-16, but she looked different. Younger, but with eyes that held a weight no young person should carry. Behind her stood a group of pilots, all smiling for the camera. "Operation Guardian Angel, Afghanistan, 2019. You were part of a classified deep strike unit." Sarah's composure cracked for just a moment. "Where did you get that?" "The same place I got the real story about how you earned your call sign." Webb pulled out another document. "Mission report, classified top secret. Captain Sarah Martinez, call sign Iron Widow, single-handedly engaged and destroyed an entire enemy squadron that had been terrorizing coalition forces for 6 months." Sarah stood up abruptly and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where her aircraft was being serviced. "You don't understand what you're reading." "Then help me understand." Webb's voice was gentler now. "The report says you were the sole survivor of your squadron after an ambush. 8 aircraft went in, only you came out." The silence stretched between them for long moments. When Sarah finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "They weren't just any pilots, Colonel. They were my friends, my family." Webb waited, sensing that she was finally ready to talk. "We had been tracking this particular enemy squadron for months. They had been hitting our forward bases, shooting down medevac helicopters, targeting anything that moved. Command decided it was time to end it." Sarah turned back to face Webb. "We flew in thinking it would be a standard engagement. Superior numbers, superior training, superior equipment. What could go wrong?" "What did go wrong?" "Everything." Sarah sat back down, her hands trembling slightly. "It was a trap. They had been feeding us false intelligence for weeks, drawing us into a kill zone. The moment we engaged, they hit us from 3 directions." Webb studied the mission report again. "According to this, you broke formation and pursued the enemy into a canyon system." "I didn't break formation, Colonel. There was no formation left to break." Sarah's voice grew harder. "I watched 7 of the best pilots I've ever known get shot down one by one. Captain Williams, who taught me how to fly inverted. Lieutenant Garcia, who was supposed to get married when we got back. Major Peterson, who had been flying for 15 years and had never lost a wingman. The report says you spent 3 hours hunting the enemy pilots who shot down your squadron. 3 hours and 17 minutes. Sarah's eyes had gone cold again, and Webb understood now where that look came from. I tracked down every single aircraft that participated in the ambush. 19 enemy fighters. I made sure none of them made it home to brag about what they had done. The enemy nicknamed you Iron Widow after that mission. Sarah laughed bitterly. Iron Widow. They thought it was because I was cold and merciless, but they had it wrong. A black widow kills her mate and moves on. I killed my enemies and carried my dead with me everywhere I went. Webb closed the file and leaned back in his chair. Why didn't you tell anyone? Your squadron mates, they think you're some kind of ice queen who doesn't belong here. Because the moment they know the real story, everything changes. They start walking on eggshells around me, treating me like I'm broken or dangerous. I just want to fly and do my job. A knock on the door interrupted them. Come in, Webb called out. Lieutenant Thompson entered, his face flushed with excitement. Sir, I wanted to thank Captain Martinez for today. Her tactics saved all our lives. Sarah started to stand, but Webb gestured for her to remain seated. Lieutenant, Captain Martinez was just telling me about her previous combat experience. Thompson looked between them, sensing the tension in the room. Sir? Tell me, Lieutenant, what did you think of Captain Martinez's performance today? Honestly, sir, it was like watching someone who had done this 100 times before. The way she read the enemy formations, anticipated their movements, stayed calm under fire. Thompson paused. Sir, I owe her an apology. We all do. Sarah shook her head. No, you don't. You reacted based on what you knew. But we should have known better. Should have trusted your experience instead of making jokes about your call sign. Webb saw an opportunity. Lieutenant, would you like to know how Captain Martinez really earned that call sign? Colonel, Sarah warned, she has a right to decide who knows her story, but your squadron has a right to know who they're flying with. Webb turned to Thompson. Captain Martinez didn't just earn her call sign in training, Lieutenant. She earned it in combat, when she single-handedly avenged her fallen squadron mates against impossible odds. Thompson's expression changed as the implications sank in. Captain, I had no idea. We all thought... You thought I was just another pilot who didn't belong here? Sarah stood up and faced him directly. And maybe that's better. Maybe it's easier for everyone if you just see me as the Ice Queen who gets the job done. No, ma'am. After today, after seeing what you can do, what you did for all of us... Thompson straightened to attention. Ma'am, it would be an honor to fly as your wingman any time. Sarah studied his face, looking for any sign of false bravado or pity. What she saw instead was genuine respect and something that had been missing from her life for too long. Acceptance. Lieutenant, tomorrow we have another mission. Training exercise this time, but I want you to practice the maneuvers we used today. Can you handle that? Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. After Thompson left, Webb and Sarah sat in silence for a few minutes. Finally, Webb spoke. The other pilots need to know, not all the details, but enough to understand who you are and what you've been through. Will it change anything? Probably, but maybe change isn't such a bad thing. Webb pulled out another document. I've been authorized to offer you a promotion to major and a transfer to an elite tactical squadron. It would mean leaving this base, starting fresh somewhere else. Sarah considered the offer. Starting fresh sounded appealing, but she thought about Thompson's words, the genuine respect she had heard in his voice. Thank you, sir, but I think I'll stay here. Maybe it's time to stop running from my past and start building a future. Webb smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. 3 months later, the dynamic on the base had completely changed. The story of Iron Widow's real origin had spread through the squadron, not as gossip, but as legend. The pilots who had once mocked her call sign now wore it with pride, knowing they served alongside someone who had proven herself in the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Lieutenant Thompson had become Sarah's most devoted wingman, and under her tutelage had developed into one of the squadron's most skilled pilots. The casual arrogance that had once defined him had been replaced by professional competence and deep respect for the realities of combat. "Iron Widow, this is Control. You have a new pilot reporting for duty. Please report to the briefing room for introduction." Sarah looked up from her maintenance reports to see a young woman walking across the tarmac, her flight bag slung over her shoulder, and determination written across her face. "Second Lieutenant Maria Santos," the young pilot said, saluting smartly. "Reporting for duty, ma'am." Sarah returned the salute and studied the newcomer. She saw something familiar in Santos's eyes, the hunger to prove herself, the weight of expectations, the fear of not being good enough. "Welcome to the squadron, Lieutenant. Have you chosen a call sign yet?" "Not yet, ma'am. The other pilot said I have to earn it." Sarah smiled, remembering her own early days. "They're right. But don't worry about earning respect, Santos. Focus on earning competence. The respect will follow." As they walked toward the briefing room, Santos worked up the courage to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since she received her assignment. "Ma'am, is it true what they say about your call sign, about Afghanistan?" Sarah paused at the doorway to the briefing room where her squadron mates were waiting. Thompson caught her eye and nodded respectfully. The others looked up from their preparations with the kind of attention she had once thought she would never receive. "Lieutenant, call signs tell stories. Some are funny, some are embarrassing, and some—" Sarah looked around at her pilots, her family. "Some remind us who we are and why we fly." She opened the door to the briefing room, where Colonel Webb was waiting with the day's mission parameters. "Let's go show you how we do things here." As Iron Widow led her squadron into another day of training and preparation, the morning sun caught the emblem painted on her aircraft, a black widow spider with steel wings, carrying the names of 7 fallen pilots who would never be forgotten. The sneers and mockery were long gone, replaced by something far more valuable: the knowledge that sometimes the most powerful warriors are forged not in victory, but in loss, and that the deadliest pilots are often those who carry their ghosts with them into every fight. Lieutenant Santos would learn, as they all had, that call signs weren't just names, they were promises, warnings, and legacies all rolled into one. And Iron Widow was a legacy worth inheriting.